Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Planning for a new vision for Memphis tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Frank Ricks, architect, urban planner with LRK. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
Ashley Cash is with the Office of Comprehensive Planning, the newly appointed administrator. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
John Zena is with the Division of Planning and Development. Thank you for being here for the city and the county.
Thank you, Eric.
And Bill Dries is senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So we're here talking about Memphis 3.0. People maybe have read about it. We've written about it. Other papers have written about it. I'm going to start with you, John, because I've talked to you a little bit more, and then we'll get Ashley, who's the administrator, over this. But what is Memphis 3.0?
Memphis 3.0 is the new comprehensive planning effort for the city of Memphis. The city's last comprehensive plan that was developed and adopted was in 1981. So we've gone nearly 40 years without having a general plan that guides the way that the city is growing, the way that the city's investing in communities, investing in infrastructure, thinking about how the city seeks to balance things like the built environment with the natural environment. So Memphis 3.0 is that opportunity as we turn the page into Memphis's third century. We'll celebrate the bicentennial in 2019. Memphis 3.0 provides a vision for how we walk into that new century with sort of a clear vision for what the city can be.
Ashley, you, again, 3 weeks or so ago, but you were prior to this doing what before you joined the city?
Before this, I've had my hands in community development over the last few years. I've worked on a lot of neighborhood level plans, a couple of project-based plans, and then most recently I was at Habitat for Humanity, managing their real estate, managing their community outreach and development efforts, and then also managing their senior housing program and another repair program in the city.
And for you, in your words, Memphis 3.0, this plan is what?
This plan, just from my perspective and my excitement about the city of Memphis, it's an opportunity for sort of integration between the city and its priorities and the citizens of Memphis. So as John said before, really looking to set the foundation for the third century, but not doing that from the top level or top-down approach, doing that with people, focusing on interactions with people and hearing what residents across the entire city think we need to sort of focus on, work on, and improve, and what's great that we can build off of for the next century.
And we'll talk more about a whole series of community meetings that are coming up. But I want to get, Frank, you've done all kinds of projects in Memphis. You were on the show, I think, we're talking about Crosstown when that was first coming together. You've done some of the work down at Harbortown, I believe, right? And this new urbanist movement and so on. What, from the private sector point of view, the guy who's got to design, build, you work in Memphis, you work all over the country, what does a plan like this mean, and how does it change how you do work and get projects done in the city?
I think when cities have a clear vision about what they're trying to achieve, and then the citizens understand that, and citizens can range from developers who build a lot of things in cities to just average Joe and Jane that might not be related to development, but you can feel that and sense it, and it gives a sort of a guiding star to everyone that is involved in that about which direction you're pushing and what you're trying to do for the city. So it's pretty obvious when a city has a high level of planning and sort of planning intelligence, if you will, about what they're trying to achieve for their city. It really helps.
And from a pure economic point of view, is it simply, cities that you work in that have these sort of comprehensive plans, is it just easier to get work done and get things built?
Ideally, it becomes easier to do the right thing the right way.
And the right thing, the right way might be what,
To
not,
achieve the goals that are identified in the plan. So every city may have different goals, and objectives and what they're trying to do, but I think that the plan and then the policies that follow the plan, which is really critical. You can have a plan, but if the policies aren't there to back it up, you won't achieve it. So it adds some clarity about where the easy path is to do the right thing.
And so, I mean, in really layman's terms, I mean, in the real basics, this is as simple as don't put an office building in the middle of a residential neighborhood, right? I mean, there's a plan. That's zoning in part, but what type of office buildings people make, what types of residential developments are done, is that correct? I mean, in terms of, to give people the nuts and bolts of this, of what this means in terms of a plan and how it impacts their neighborhood and the streets they drive down.
Right. One of the ways that we're, I think, thinking about future land use and the connectivity of land use to transportation is in terms of community character. So I think as a profession, planning has moved away from thinking in sort of discrete chunks of residential here, office here, industrial here, commercial here, and so much of the way that we think about cities now, is about how we can have a vibrant mix of uses that creates a more sort of livable quality of life and character within communities. So we may not necessarily be talking about let's separate that office building from outside of this particular residential area, but how are we designing the communities? How are we designing for how we envision our city growing based on what's forecasted, based on sort of market intelligence that we're seeing in such a way that we can create that vibrancy in all communities, but that's unique to the character of the communities that we do have. Obviously places like Whitehaven are very much different than places like downtown in terms of their character of that mix of uses, and so that's something we have to honor, but also think about the sort of that each community has their own path of getting to an improved state.
Right, Bill.
For so many years, when you talked about development of areas, it was like the word downtown was automatically in front of it. It seems as if in the last 2 or 3 years, with a lot of hard advance work before it, that we've kind of broken out of that. As you mentioned Whitehaven, there are plans there now. There's a new 450-room resort hotel there now. So how much momentum does being able to break out, so to speak, outside of downtown give to this planning effort and people seeing the possibilities for this?
I think.
Oh, sure. Great question. So we are conscious to that maybe people, or maybe there's a perception, or maybe it's a little bit grounded in some reality, but people seem to view a lot of the planning efforts in certain areas that are maybe more popular. And so to sort of negate that, we've got a staff of planners, 5 planners on staff currently that are going to be working in different areas in the city to ensure that we get the voice of people across the city in different areas, but also, like John was mentioning earlier with community character, making sure that we're not trying to duplicate something in downtown out in East Memphis or out in South Haven. Each community or each neighborhood has its own differences, and so we're very sensitive to that. And John, would you?
Yeah, I would just add to that I think it is important that we're able to leverage so much of the momentum that we're seeing right now. I mean, obviously coming out of the recession, a part of that sort of new investment in real estate and in development has been a focus on cities and bringing development back in cities and seeing projects that aren't necessarily downtown, like the Crosstown project or developments, perhaps in East Memphis. I think seeing that sort of renewal of interest in developing in the city is really encouraging. But at this point, at least, the project like the one at Graceland is a little bit of an exception in that so much of the development that we're seeing is really kind of centered around the Poplar Corridor right now. What we want to be able to do in this planning process is leverage the fact that we have new investment dollars coming into the city and think about how those dollars and new dollars can get spread around to other areas of the city that may not see the scale of investment like bringing a crosstown concourse back to life, but think about what's the appropriate scale of development to get a corridor like McLemore Avenue to see new activity to build on the anchor of Stacks there, or Elvis Presley Boulevard to build on the investment of the guest house there. How new business development sort of ripples from that to again sort of bring new life to areas outside of kind of that central corridor of Poplar, where we've seen a lot so far.
Right. Frank, can you talk some about the question of scale, because that's usually where you might see the controversy arise. This is too big for our neighborhood. This is not big enough for our neighborhood. I mean, every area has its own scale.
Sure, and scale is important for, well, there are two aspects of scale. One is for some developers, for some building types, scale is an issue. If you can't do enough of it, it might not make economic sense, right? So you're looking for the development. Cities are predominantly built by private sector developers, so they've got financial models they're trying to look at. So there's a scale of the project itself that each developer has an opinion about, but then there's the scale of the neighborhood itself and what makes sense, and are you trying to maintain that scale, or you could have a scale of a neighborhood that is predominantly, let's say, a quarter of big box retail. Neighborhoods are behind that. The scale, you got two different scales right up next to each other, so you can begin to transition between large scale, small scale by inserting some new development that transitions and builds a more complete neighborhood in terms of uses, which then makes it more walkable in terms of you don't have to get in your car and drive 3 miles. So these issues of scale, they're real, and they're real to the people that live there if they think something's being imposed on them immediately that's going to disrupt the scale of their neighborhood without understanding is there a benefit to it. That's where you get a lot of backlash. What I'm hopeful of, and we've seen in other cities, is when this plan the team will embark on will address those seams between different scales where you start to blend them, and sometimes that's really where the magic happens. Crosstown's a good example of huge building, one of the largest buildings in the city, sits predominantly in a residential, surrounded by mostly residential and small scale commercial. You'd say, hypothetically, someone might say, well, that's out of scale. Well, it is just if you just measure scale, but if you measure the uses and how it blends and how it connects, and that takes planning, then you can transform this issue of scale as a bad thing or density is a bad thing to it's actually a good thing if you understand, if it's intentional about how it's put together. So it's a...
And Ashley, to get those, what neighbors want and what they want to see, and some of the things that seem right to neighbors, and and things that don't, that have the right scale, for instance, these community meetings that are coming up. Can you talk about those?
Sure. So we've got initially 14 rallies across the city in different areas of the city. And that's where people will be able to tell us what do they think is good, what's working, how their community sort of connects to the city, or where are some areas for improvements. We'll talk about some challenges and then also get a chance to talk about some solutions. And that's sort of the first step of real engagement or true engagement on the part of this process. Going forward, we'll be engaging the community just in different segments, maybe not as neighborhood-based initially, but just engaging the community around different topical issues like transportation, like sustainability and connectivity. And then we'll follow that back up with some more intense district planning where we can really develop out those character plans. So we initially talk with the community and see, get a really dip our toe in and see sort of what's working, what's not working, look at some larger visioning for the city, and then come back down to the community.
And how do you, maybe I'll turn to you, so there's a planning process, it's a multi-year process, things happen, it's not as if nothing happens until the plan is done,
Right.
but the plan is officially rolled out, the goal is 2019, do I have that right? And how though, at the end of all this, do you have a plan that doesn't just sit on a shelf? I think you referenced that earlier, maybe it was in an article I read, that the last comprehensive plan was done in the 80s, it was called Memphis 2000, and it kind of just sat on the shelf. How do you make it a document that actually has the impact that all these community people will ask for that people like Frank want in terms of a guide to where they're going to develop and not development, how do you make it an impactful document?
Well, there's several different ways, and I will, correct one thing. I do think that 81 plan did do more than just sit on a shelf.
Well, yeah, and it must have been somebody else that I read.
And there was a lot in that plan that didn't get done. That's true, but there were some pretty big recommendations, particularly the expansion of the size of the city geographically. That did get done.
For better or worse.
Right, and where we said we would grow, we did. So, and I'd say. One of the most important things, of course, is having the plan adopted at the end of the process, and that was done with the 1981 plan. And so that sort of act of adoption, makes that plan sort of the guiding document that's followed, within the halls of City Hall. But that's just how city government works to implement it. I think it's also how you make sure that the plan gets implemented. Is not only through that adoption and the policies that follow, as Frank mentioned, but having that robust community engagement process that we are embarking on, and involving so many individuals from the community, and ultimately achieving buy-in from so many individuals of the community. I think that's essential as well to seeing adoption, or seeing implementation. And to that end, I'll interrupt you just a second. Shay Flynn, who former city council, now with the chamber and so on, has talked about when Nashville went through its planning process, and they finished sometime in the last year or something. Yeah. Many of those people that Ashley talked about, you're all talking about in terms of the community, the districts, the community engagement. Many of those people ultimately got involved in politics. They ultimately joined the city council or metro council or whatever it's called up there, right? I mean, so that buy-in does start sort of organically, and people see it as access to, hey, I want to make sure this thing gets implemented. I'm gonna run for office, kind of thing. And we saw, we met with individuals personally who were on the metro council in Nashville who had not been involved in politics, but led a community coalition as part of their comprehensive plan and decided that they wanted to get more involved in the process and ran for Metro Council. Yeah, Frank, you were going to add
I just think the key is a planning culture, not a plan. A plan, which we did back then, that was it. We didn't nurture that appropriately, nor did we update it. So like Nashville's just completed their update to their plan. I've heard a number of city planners say every 6 to 8 years you have to go through an update process to keep it valid, and you learn from those 6 years worth of work and you update it. And I think we've suffered from a lack of updating has been a big issue.
Right, Bill.
Economically, we're really good right now. Maybe not ideal, but certainly the economic conditions for this kind of development are better than they were even 2 or 3 years ago. The money started to flow again. What happens if we hit a bump in the road with the national economy to all of this?
I still think that the purpose for which we're pursuing the plan is still 100% valid. We're looking to create the vision of the city in years to come. And we're looking to engage the community around that vision, the 5, 10, 20-year vision of the city in the future. We're looking to establish that planning culture that Frank talked about that has sort of been a missing piece for us. Those are things that are valid whether the economy is cool or whether it's hot. So I think that the purpose is still there. In fact, there's some people who might argue that it's probably easier to do a comprehensive plan in a chilled economy. But I think no matter what sort of the national economy does, it's important to set that vision. But it's also important to continue to update the plan so that if things do sort of unexpectedly change in a way that might disrupt some of our ability to implement, our ability to achieve certain goals and certain timeframes. That's also why you update. And so there are external forces like that. There's external forces like new technologies. Those are reasons why you also update.
Right. And Frank, the chairman's circle at the Greater Memphis Chamber had been talking about this as well when times were not so good.
Yes, right. And I think that prompted them to, ask the question, what are we trying to, where are we going? What are we trying to do when things weren't so good? And the good thing about that is so both good things and bad things that might be happening kind of chill. So it gives you a moment, which is what happened. And I think we started asking questions, and that's why they approached me, is just saying we don't have the guiding star. We don't have the vision, the plan that it was a lot of private sector folks saying, what are we doing and where are we going? And so that led to this planning initiative out of the chamber, which happened to align with the stars, with leadership changes and things that I think put us in a good spot. And when the economy does slow, that's when you take a breath and you look at what was working, what's not working, what's changing in the marketplace that might not be here yet. You're looking at other cities, what are the trends, where are things going, and you start to make adjustments. Again, it's the planning culture, you're always shifting. It's not like you establish one vision and that's it, and that's all that matters. We'll have to adapt as both to local feedback as well as external feedback.
And Ashley, you talked about this in the briefing we had earlier, because the question came up, well, what about projects that are in the pipeline? What if there's a private project that arrives on the horizon? This is permeable, I guess. The borders of this are, it can take all of those things into account.
Right, which our goal is, not to slow down any work that's happening or any projects that are happening, but really look at aligning efforts and figuring out, what are we moving towards as a city? What is our optimal growth strategy for our city? And so once you have those things, you can sort of align that with what's current, what projects are in the pipeline, should there be a couple of tweaks, and then where we're going and what existing plans are sort of aligning with that as well. But you have to have that foundation first before you can say, well, we need to change these couple of things. You don't know until you know, essentially. And so that's what Memphis 3.0 is trying to get us at.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit. We have 4 minutes left here. Greenprint. The last time you were on the show, John, you were on, I think you had just gotten involved. I can't quite remember because I'm old. But talk about what Greenprint is for people who've maybe lost track of it and how that plays into this, and also the HUD grant that came as a part of Greenprint.
Okay. The Mid-South Regional Greenprint it was a plan that was done a couple of years ago at the regional scale that connects a network of greenways and trails across 4 counties and 3 states. It was really, I think, our region's first attempt at sort of banding together across what was 18 cities and 4 counties to come up with a common vision for connectivity long term. So we focused a lot on green space, but also on sort of the effects of green space and investing in green space, which I think so many people can attest to today with so much success that we've had with green space today, of how it is truly transformational for the community and for the region.
And so much of that stuff was happening organically. I mean, there was a green line, and then there was the Valentine Evergreen Green Line, and then the Wolf River Conservancy starts talking about doing what it's doing, and you all try to bring a holistic vision in the same way that there are these great things happening in Binghamton and Broad Avenue and Whitehaven, but there's not that holistic vision, right? Yep. I mean, is that a fair analogy?
Absolutely. So I think in terms of how the Greenprint plays in, in one sense, it provides a model for us and figuring out, what's the best way to kind of pull all of this alignment together and make sure that that we're honoring those sort of projects and plans that are in place. But it also provides, I think, a good foundation for us. I mean, we just went through a pretty robust planning process across the region. We talked about, how, specifically how, communities connect to that network, and in this case, how the city of Memphis sort of anchors into that network. And so we've got a lot of opportunity to learn from the recommendations that we got from the community, from the stakeholders, to apply to those sort of issue areas that we know we'll address in Memphis 3.0.
And I've heard you, because we just have a minute left, I've heard you speak before about, so Memphis, Shelby County got a HUD grant, $60 million HUD grant from the federal government, a resilience grant to do some amazing work in 3 neighborhoods. You've said we would not have gotten that if we hadn't had Greenprint. If Greenprint weren't there as a base for what was happening in Memphis and Shelby County, there was no chance of getting that money, or little chance.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there were so many factors of why Shelby County was awarded that $60 million, but chief among those factors was because we had the Greenprint plan. We had a vision for how green space would change our communities. And for this particular grant application, that vision included how the communities would adapt to climate change and become more resilient to increased flooding, increased heat as a result of climate change, so that as we're building out these connections, we're doing it in a way that builds up resilience to those threats, but also builds up communities and community assets.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. We've got 30 seconds left. Thank you all for being here. Congratulations on your new job. And the people can go to Memphis 3.0.
Memphis 3.0 point is spelled out.
Okay.
And we'll talk about our rallies. The first rally is November 28th at 5:30 Ed Rice and Fraser.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Join us again next week.